Hi all. So I went to a funeral today in support. I didn't know the person who died, but it was in support of a dear friend, and I was worried about how I feel, because I'm not one to normally attend funerals, and I wasn't sure basically how one was meant to be. And thankfully, Joe rang me as I was going home after the funeral, so I had a chance to talk to her about my emotions because I was utterly confused by how I felt. I mean, sure enough, I felt sadness and empathy for my dear friend who lost a very close relative, obviously. That is to say, obviously, I would feel the empathy for her. But at the funeral, there were a couple of triggers which basically ended up me losing it. And then why I felt guilty is I felt selfish because the triggers reminded me of my own past. The funeral was held in a Catholic church, so it was a Catholic service, and all the flashbacks of my childhood attending church with my parents, that started me crying. And then I managed to get that under control, especially since when I was growing up, I was taught very quickly never cry. My mum would basically show me, it's like every time I burst into cry, craving support from her, she would just leave the room and basically walk out of the house. So I never got that support when I needed. So I learned basically not to cry in public. Anyway, the triggers that triggered some emotions, I managed to get those emotions under control. And then they play a song which also triggers, if that makes any sense. That new song, How Do I Say Goodbye? And because every time I hear that song again, I think about my mum. Not so much my father, but also my mum, because she was the person who's been with me for most of my entire youth, up until my 30s or 40s. And so it's a really hard song, so I completely lost it through that song. And that was partially embarrassing for me. I'm still not used to letting people see, me cry, and so here I am trying to. I was sobbing, and I did try very hard to muffle my sobs in silence, and I'm pretty sure I succeeded there because they were silent. But I was sitting with a friend, and she saw me that I lost it, and she offered me a tissue. So thank you, Kat. But yeah, so. And that's why I felt guilty coming home, and I still couldn't stop sort of tearing up because of my own past, and I thought I shouldn't be thinking about my own life, and it wasn't until Joe explained to me on the phone that it's okay to do that. You can think about your own grief because it helps you then empathize with the person who is grieving through the funeral. It's like I never thought about seeing it that way, because I've always just learned to hide my emotions and not let people see, when I'm that upset, and so I feel a little bit less guilty now. And yeah, I do empathize. I do empathize with the person who is grieving for her family member who the funeral was for today. But yeah, so I thought I'd just share this little bit of moments because I don't know if anyone else ever goes through this, if anyone's ever been through a funeral and not know how to react. I mean, as Joe said, growing up, I was never taught how we're meant to behave or how we're meant to act or feel, so I didn't really know. But now I know, and I thought I'd share with you that if you're going to a funeral and you don't know how to react, it's okay to think about your own triggers because it helps you understand the grieving person better, by thinking about your own. It's not being selfish, because I thought I was being selfish by doing that. I guess no, it's not. It's normal process, which is good to know. I remember in my teens, I remembered making a promise myself I'd never go to a funeral because I didn't want to deal with death in any way, even if it was being in support of someone. I had never planned to go to my parents' funeral. I did end up going to my mother's funeral when she died, and I think that was one of the triggers today because the friend I went in support of, she had so much support. I mean, the church was almost full to brim. And when I think about my own mother's funeral, there was maybe a handful of people there. And Mum, I thought, had so many friends, and I thought there'd be so many people there to support her, even if nobody knew me. But no, and I was really saddened to see just how few people there were. There were a few neighbours from a street away, a few men who I'm guessing were maybe clients of hers in the past. Her dogs were there, and and one friend of mine was there, and that was basically it. And the people running the funeral. Oh, today's funeral was done by white lady, so it was a really, really beautiful service, very well, very professionally done. I seriously can't remember who ran. It could have been also a white lady that did mums, or I remember white uniforms, so possibly white ladies. I don't know what other ones where the women are in white. Because I think also with Mum's, the hospital organised her funeral. It was a very, very small one because she was also cremated, so it was done at Rookwood Cemetery. And thankfully I kept her ashes so that I could release them in Parramatta Park, so that whenever I wanted to be near Mum, I didn't have to go to Rookwood Cemetery, which is too far away. I only had to go to Parramatta Park. And then the funny thing is, I released her where the bats love to hang out, in Parramatta Park. So every time I go under a tree where bats are hanging out, I think about Mum. It's sad. I don't know if bats fighting and squabbling and peeing and making the place smell like bat pee makes me think of my mum. I don't know, that's probably not a good thing, and that alone makes me giggle. But Mum was always good at squabbling, so it's kind of suitable in a roundabout way. I don't know. But yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to share this bit of experience with you guys since I've got no one else at home to talk about it. I don't want to sort of dampen the moods of my fur kids. They'll be looking at me like, Mum, why are you crying? So I thought I'd share with you guys instead. Right, that's it for me for now.